everyone. So, I come from the Center for Preventive Archaeology. In future, I'll relate to it as a CPA. Now, at CPA, in the past 5 years, we slowly shifted towards GIS use in most segments of our work. That's from desk-based assessment, remote sensing, excavations, field surveys, publishing. Like GIS became a hub where we gather all the data layers, we manipulate data, we review it, analyze it, and also publish it. Now, through this presentation, I'll try to present this path, the process that we went through until now. Now, CPA is part of the Institute for Protection of Cultural Heritage, and it consists of 3 main sections which need to work hand in hand to achieve its goals. Our main state-funded research activities are preliminary archaeological research, special planning documents, research for non-profit residential building, research on monuments that are owned by the state. So, in fact, basically, we conduct all kinds of archaeological activities, from excavation, post-excavation processing, field surveys, geophysics, publishing. But CPA was founded in 2009. At that time, like still, CAD software was mainly used to produce, manipulate, and publish archaeological spatial data. But as a state institution, CPA was also involved in big state projects where archaeological potential had to be assessed and mapped. Also, CPA got the assignment of establishing the national database of archaeological research. So, the nature of this data, or let's say the CAD software, was not really suitable for this kind of data. So, basically, the data pushed us into shift the first step into using GIS. Now, origins of GIS originate in 1960s, but some methods and concepts predated quite some. For example, one of the earliest successful spatial analysis was done already in 1854, when John Snow mapped locations of cholera outbreaks, and based on the clusters of these outbreaks, he managed to identify the water source that was responsible for the outbreak. Now, the first real digital GIS was developed for the Canadian government in the 60s, which was used to manage landscape management and monitoring state resources. Then first cases GIS used in anthropology and ecology, when we go back into 80s, the one big milestone was this study done on the Hawaiian Island by Gaffney and Vincent Gaffney and Zoran Stančić. Now, since that, like since 90s, GIS remained mainly in academic sphere. It was used for like this kind of wider spatial analysis. Like, now, this is probably mainly due to like software prices, accessibility to spatial data, and demand for highly skilled operators to use it. Also due to hardware limitations and for many other reasons. So, spatial data in archaeological digital era was locked onto our CAD software to produce, manipulate, etc. Like mentioned before, the CPA driving force of this shift towards GIS was the data. In the beginning, only one or two experts were utilizing GIS. In the beginning, it was used for remote sensing and for mapping ecological potential. Especially with the later, the data was still generated in Excel by archaeologists and then mapped into GIS for plotting and for these reports. But quickly, the databases had to be designed for several layers of data, like mentioned before, the register of ecological research, but also others. These so-called databases with firstly only like single file-based layers where this data was stored. Some of them also still combined the spatial data was in shapefiles, while metadata was stored in Excel files. Like main reason for this was because archaeologists would, first of all, there was not enough software for many workers, co-workers to use the GIS. They didn't know it, how to use it, so Excel was, I guess, at the time, natural environment where wider circle of experts could enter the data. Around this time, three big milestones happened that additionally affect our shift towards GIS. First one was emergence or maturing of open source GIS, but also other software. So GIS plus this database software solutions, so on. The other one is was the European Union inspired directive, which provided access to spatial data for the whole countries. And third one was advances in photogrammetry algorithms, which drastically changed firstly the documenting procedures in the field, but especially it changed the types of data that came now in the field, from the field in the office. So also the work processes in the office had to be adjusted to this new data that was coming in. Now, how did these milestones affect us at CPR? Open source software allowed everyone to actually have GIS software installed on their computer. Hence, everyone could view data, could manipulate data. In fact, more and more people got familiar with GIS, at least familiar with it. So GIS became not only a data manipulator and plotter, but also as a data viewer for not only for a selection of people who had expert knowledge in CAD or GIS, but a much wider audience. And with more and more work done in GIS, everyone became more skilled, as well as more ambitious in what we want, what we expect out of GIS. So now also availability of the data also simplified preparations of GIS project. For example, before, since CAD software had certain limitations in the amount of data you can load in it, for each project, only for a small area, the data had to be gathered with topographical maps, digital orthophoto, and so on. While in GIS, it is possible to load layers, these general layers to the whole country and still work smoothly. So we also started. That's how then our first plugin was developed, which allows us to load all this, let's say, starting layers of each project can be loaded in the GIS project only with one click. So now every project we start, it starts with a click on this plugin that loads all these layers from digital orthophotos, cadastre, layers about this register protected sites, and so on. Now, at this point, the data was still stored in the file systems, mostly shape files, partially in Excel files. But once again, the data voiced its opinion. It soon we got to some problems with the single file system, like there came to partial losses of data due to shapefile limitation in length of text that can be stored, the size of data can contain. There were problems with text encoding and so on. Plus, single file use did not allow multi-user everything and access to the data. And another very important aspect is when having single file systems, it is easily lose control over versions of the data. Soon you have, I don't know, file 1, then you have version 2, version 3, and the fourth person comes and copies this and so on. So you can easily lose track of which the data is actually the last one and contains all the relevant on-to-time data. So that's why we installed Postgres Database with the Postgres extension, which allows also storing spatial data into the database. So in essence, we established the proper infrastructure for the data to be stored. Now, we moved our layers into the database, and also we managed to automate some fields that previously had to be entered manually. We embedded some functions that allow us, for example, tracking changes. It's also possible to revert changes and so on. Also, the switch to database allowed us that several users at the same time could edit the data without losing control of which version is right. And also, it allowed us to share the data among wider audience. Now, for in some cases, single file system is still used, but we switched into GeoPackage because it, compared to shapefile, it ditched some of those drawbacks it had. Plus, GeoPackage is actually a mini database packed in one file, so it also allows to pack in several layers and also some these functions and logic similar to the real big databases. Now that the data we had in GIS was available to everyone to see and edit, we also started working on the input forms to enter and view the metadata of these layers. We also included buttons, also some buttons, for example, to access some external data. In this case, we have a register of archaeological research link to PDF reports. This. So we made the GIS also more user-friendly for users who are not so familiar, not so comfortable on computers. So no, it was to make it more acceptable for them. Well, I only briefly mentioned plugins before, but GIS, well, didn't mention GIS software. Some of them offer also option of adding plugins, which are like mini programs that can upgrade the functionality of the program. There are like over almost 1,000, I think, plugins already that different users are uploading online and are accessible to everyone. There's even plugin for building plugins, which shows how rapid the development of these tools can be within the program. So through adaptation of GIS into our workflow or adjustment of our workflows into GIS, we also created many plugins or simple scripts that simplify workflows or make it easier for unskilled users to work in GIS. For example, one is also LIDAR downloader, which allows downloading LIDAR data for Slovenia and the Netherlands. Then also a series of other plugins that from aiding into geophysics processing, producing reports, processing LIDAR, and so on. So, even for easier search of the project in our project archive. So now at this point we came to the snowball effect. The more we use it, the more we could use it for. So quickly then we started mapping field surveys, excavation, use it for excavation plans, for maps for publishing, creating vector images. So in fact, we completely abandoned the CAD software in all of our workflows. Now, maps and vector images are now entirely produced in GIS without the need of any other vector manipulation software. Together with data acquired using photogrammetry, we can create accurate representation of documented archaeological remains. So here we have some plan views that are a combination of DEM derived from photogrammetry together with overlaid data of stratigraphical units and cross-section also recorded using photogrammetry, which is rectified in all correct scales with above the sea level heights and so on. Here we have example also some grave documented using photogrammetry. Out of this data documented using photogrammetry, we present the grave, so the ortho-rectified photo, plus the cross section that is drawn based on the levels, so DMs acquired by photogrammetry. Then we also, there are little gems like this. In this case, we used this is was a drawing of some old excavations, and we used a simple script to convert Munza chart codes into RGB values, to use it to color the stratigraphic units in the cross section to somewhat accurately represent the colors of the cross section, or at least the relations between the colors of the layers. But one big benefit of it we found is also GIS serves as a great, almost ready-to-use database frontend. With a little effort, we can design the GIS project in a way that it's easy to access all different data from archaeological research. So, like with one click, for example, on a cross section, we can access this rectified photo of the cross section, or also access to all the metadata gathered during the excavation. So about cross sections, stratigraphic units. So basically, all the data is produced spatially or in form of tables, can be viewed also within this GIS projects. But not only within, not only excavations, also in remote sensing, geophysics, GIS is used to compile layers and to analyze the results, to try to understand what the data is trying to tell us, what the data has to tell us. Here's also another simple example of linking the data, so spatial information, location of the trenches and the distribution of the pottery. Well, in this segment, we are still just scratching the surface of the potential that GIS has to, and our data has to offer, like interconnecting data, linking it back to spatial component, trying to understand it. This is where it all comes back to origins of GIS, so drawing dots and trying to figure out what they're trying to tell us, where the source of this outbreak is, for example. So this was short overview of our process, which is a process. Mastering GIS, it's not static. It demands constant self-improvement. Need to follow the updates. Its complexity and the rapid software development provides many opportunities of upgrading and optimizing our processes of work. I think it's harder to master GIS in 100%. So you can never be bored with it, but on the other hand, one can be satisfied with himself, comfortable using it, even though you, even without knowing that you only master 1% of it. So in relation to this, also my experience that GIS in CPA was quite warmly accepted. There were some frustrations due to lack of skill, but how to use it. But this takes time to overcome.